All right, welcome back tonight. We are here with our guest of the night again for the second time, Mr. Noe Torres. Noe, thank you for joining us here on Inception Radio.
I'm so happy to be on tonight, Jamie. Thank you for inviting me again. And I'm looking forward to sharing one of the most amazing UFO cases that I have ever heard of.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it myself because I always love digging up old cases, and this one sounds very interesting, and we'll get to it. This case we're going to talk about tonight is known as the Cisco Grove UFO encounter. Can you tell us a little bit about it, where it happened?
Okay, this is one of the most fantastic, really eye-popping UFO cases from the 1960s. And the way I came across it is my co-author and my good friend, Ruben Uriarte, who is the MUFON director for Northern California. When he came into the position of MUFON director 10 or 12 years ago, he was looking through the case files for some of the major UFO cases that they've had in Northern California, and he ran across a story that just struck him in the face because of its high level of significance, and just the details of the case were so striking to him. And that was an incident that happened in near Sacramento, California. It happened in the Tahoe National Forest, which is east of Sacramento, right along the border with Nevada, the border of California with Nevada. And it happened on September 4th, 1964, that this amazing encounter that we're going to talk about, and I should mention, it took place during close to a small town in California known as Cisco Grove, hence the name, the Cisco Grove UFO encounter. And as the story unfolds tonight, I think your listeners are in for a real treat, because when Ruben ran across those case documents, he had the whole package in there. And as we'll talk more about it, we'll see that it was one of the most highly regarded UFO cases in terms of documentation, eyewitness credibility, and so forth of the 1960s.
Wow. Now, did this happen after Betty and Barney Hill's abduction?
The Betty and Barney Hill abduction in New Hampshire occurred in September of 1961. Interestingly enough, it was at the same time of year, and so it happened 3 years, almost to the day, before the case with Donald Shrum that we're going to talk about tonight. And it was also the Betty and Barney Hill case, as well as the Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, Pascagoula, Mississippi UFO abduction in 1973. Both the Hill case and the Pascagoula case were investigated by the same people, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Dr. James Harder, and Dr. Anita Brothers, and they all three of them regarded these three cases, Barney and Betty Hill, Donald Shrum case, which we're going to talk about, and Pascagoula, as three of the most credible and most research-worthy UFO cases of that time period.
Yeah, and the Pascagoula, Mississippi incident is something that I had not really looked into too much, but as you tipped me off to it a few weeks back, I looked into it. What an amazing case! So
that's an amazing case, and it shares a lot of similarities with what we're going to talk about tonight, the Cisco Grove UFO encounter, as does the Betty and Barney Hill encounter. It also shares some similarities with what our topic is tonight, and also the Travis Walton encounter, also from the 1970s, 1975, which I talked about a little bit briefly when we started, also has some points that are similar as well. Okay. In fact, the principal eyewitness in the Cisco Grove case, Mr. Don Shrum, has studied the Travis Walton case extensively because he's so interested in how the ETs behaved very similarly in both cases, and a lot of the thoughts that ran through his mind were also expressed in the Travis Walton case by Travis.
All right, well, let's get into this case now. What were the eyewitnesses doing the night of when this happened? Was it daytime, nighttime?
Okay, well, this is a very unusual case in many ways, and one of the things that's kind of striking at first is that this was actually a hunting trip by three individuals who worked for one of the nation's leading missile defense contractors of the early 1960s, called the Aerojet Corporation of Sacramento, California. So all three gentlemen that went hunting this it was a long weekend, and they started early on Friday, and they were going to go on an overnight bow and arrow hunting excursion to the Tahoe National Forest. And so they had Friday off, and they were planning to spend the night and do some more hunting on Saturday, and then head home late Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening. So the three individuals in question, Mr. Don Shrum is the principal eyewitness, the one who experienced most of what happened that night. But there was another gentleman, Mr. Alvarez, who was one of his co-hunters, who also witnessed the arrival of the initial UFO in the case, and he gave a written affidavit afterward in support of what Mr. Shrum said he saw and experienced. And all three men, in fact, the two companions of Mr. Shrum, were later told people that they affirmed that Mr. Shrum went through something extremely difficult, judging by the appearance and his behavior after he finally made it back to the camp that they had established for that hunting expedition. Yeah.
I've heard of this case. Now that you're talking about it, I do remember this case.
It's a well-known case in a general sense, but the actual details of the case had not come out until now.
Sure.
This is the first time that there has been a book published about the incident, and completely based on Mr. Shrum's eyewitness testimony. He and his family contacted us a few years back, and Reuben went to visit Mr. Shrum and spent a lot of time interviewing him both on video and on audio. And Mr. Shrum and his family were very interested in having a book done. One of the initial reasons, I need to back up just a little bit, the reason that Mr. Shrum never gave out his identity when he spoke about this UFO encounter is because of the fact that he had this government defense contracting job with Aerojet. So in the early 60s, it was a kiss of death for somebody to go out in public talking about aliens and UFO encounters when they worked, in a sense, for the U.S. government.
Yeah, it still is today in some parts.
Right. So what Mr. Shrum did was he did contact UFO researchers about his sighting, and it was published and it was made known. However, his name was never used ever in any form. There were made up names, and a lot of times it just said anonymous witness, and that was one of the reasons that this case is not as well known as some of the others we mentioned, the Barney and Betty Hill, the Pascagoula, the Travis Walton, because of his initial reluctance to have his name and the names of his two hunting companions released to the public. Because of that, you know how it is in the UFO investigation field when you have anonymous witnesses who don't want their names released. Yeah. Everybody kind of raises eyebrows and says, oh, well, if they don't want their identities known, they must, this possibly is not true, or they're hiding something. And that wasn't the case at all. It was just the fact that he was He was not a wealthy individual, and he was struggling to make ends meet, and he could not afford at that period in time he had just gotten married, and they just had a child, that he could not at that point in time, as he has told us in several interviews, afford to be without a job. Yeah. And he had worked hard to get that position with Aerojet, which was one of the leading employers in the Sacramento area at the time.
And you can understand that because this is a family man, and look what happened to Travis Walton a few years later. I mean, everything descends on you. Everybody wants to talk to you. People scrutinize you. So he did a smart thing. I would have probably done the same as him.
He did a smart thing. And a few years back, as I said, he contacted Reuben because he knew that Reuben had taken over the position as MUFON director. Mm-hmm. And a previous MUFON director in the late 60s, Paul Cerny, was the lead investigator originally in this case. Mr. Paul Cerny, who is now deceased, he was with NICAP at the time that this incident occurred, but later transitioned over to MUFON. And so the Shrums, Mr. Shrum and his family, were extremely happy with the way Mr. Cerny conducted the initial investigations. He honored their request that his name not be given out. He was very sensitive, spent a lot of time with the family, and so they were extremely impressed. In Reuben, they found another person whom they could trust and who would treat their information with the utmost of sensitivity. And after developing a relationship with my co-author, Reuben Uriarte, they decided that they wanted him and me to go ahead and finally tell the complete story of this incredible UFO encounter in the form of a book authorized by them. Mrs. Shrum wrote the foreword for the book, and Mr. Shrum gave us a lot of guidance in telling the story and gave us additional details that had never been published before. So we were extremely happy to have had this opportunity.
And again, this book that we're talking about tonight is Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove UFO Encounter. All right, so let's get back to what they were doing out there hunting and
yes.
How this came about.
Right. Okay. So let's fasten our seatbelts and go into this. We also have some audio clips of the principal eyewitness, Mr. Don Shrum, that are just going to knock your socks off. They were in the forest, and they had established a base camp earlier in the day. They had spent most of the day wandering around, looking for game, primarily deer. And Mr. Shrum tells me that they hadn't actually found anything. He had bagged a snake that happened to cross their path. But other than that, there was no game to be had during that whole Friday. And it was getting toward evening, and the three men had gone off on separate routes, but parallel to each other. They had no kind of communication gear to keep in contact. They made an effort to remain within earshot of each other. But what happened was that Mr. Shrum decided to follow this long ravine. He went right along the edge of the ravine. Then one of his hunting buddies took the opposite side of the ravine, traveling in parallel to him. And then the third hunter was down below in the ravine at the base of it, which was like, it was like a canyon. So he was traveling also in parallel to the other two. Well, Mr. Shrum was thinking that when he reached the end of that ravine, that there would be a way to cross over to the other side and he could rejoin his companions. But when he got to the end of the ravine, there was a sheer rock wall and there was no way to cross, so he had to double back. Well, by this time, it was getting dark, and he was very concerned because it was that particular part of the state he hadn't really spent much time at. They had been out hunting before, but not in this particular area. So he didn't know the terrain well. There were there's a lot of rocky it's kind of a rocky, isolated area with ravines and drop-offs, and it's very easy to get yourself hurt in the dark there.
Yeah.
And also, there had been many reports of predators in the area, most urgently of which, to Mr. Shrum, was a concern were the reported bear sightings by other hunters in the area. And there were other kinds of predators as well that threaten human beings. So what he decided to do, it became clear to him that he could not make it back to camp, having had to double back, and with the darkness approaching, he did what many hunters typically do in a situation like this when they can't rejoin their companions or make it back to camp. He decided to find a safe place to hole up for the night and just make it through the night as best as possible, and then that way be safe from predators and other dangers. The danger of stumbling around in the dark, possibly falling into a pit or twisting his ankle or whatever. So what Mr. Shrum weighed his options. There weren't other clear forms of shelter in his surrounding environment. So what he decided to do was he decided to climb up into a tree. He had a military-style belt with canteen, and he figured that he could loosen up that belt and tie it around one of the larger branches around the upper trunk of that pine tree that he climbed, and he could spend the night there and get a little bit of rest and then rejoin his companions at daybreak.
Yeah.
So he did that, and he resolved to make it through the night, although it was not a comfortable situation for him, but the alternative was possibly worse, as we mentioned. So he was up in that tree when all of a sudden he caught out of the corner of his eye, coming in from the north, a strange-looking light. It was kind of, at first, he said that it looked like someone that was carrying a lantern walking down a path. It wasn't exactly a straight line course. It would kind of deviate from side to side and up and down, like it was being jostled around a little bit. And then it was coming toward him, and his immediate thought was that his two buddies had determined that he was lost, and they had gone to the local forest rangers, and they had requested a helicopter to come out and look for him. So he thought it was a helicopter out to rescue him. His spirits lifted. He got down from the tree and he set 3 signal fires. There were some large flat rocks around the base of the tree, and he had with him lots of matches. And he gathered up some of the surrounding brush, and he set 3 small fires, signal fires, for the helicopter, or so he thought it was at that point. Well, the light started approaching, and what happened next is amazing. If we can hear clip number 150, the appearance of the mothership, we'll hear in the witness's own words when it became clear to him that this was not a helicopter.
All right, let's listen to that.
And then I saw a light. It looked like a lantern going up and down a trail, but then it came over the top of a tree, and I got kind of excited then because I thought it was a helicopter from the Forest Service. And I stood between 2 of the fires that I built on the rocks and waved my arms and yelled and screamed, and finally that light started coming towards me. So I was really relieved then, because I thought it was a helicopter still, until it got within maybe 60 feet or yards. I'm not sure the distance at night, but it just hovered there with no sound. So then I panicked because I knew it was no helicopter. I thought it was something from outer space, but it looked like all I could see is about an 8-inch glow, So I thought it was just a little tiny, flying saucer. And then I kind of panicked, and I threw my bow up in the tree again, and hand walked out that limb and got up in the tree. And I had all camouflage clothing on, so I figured, well, they won't see me here, But then this light went a half circle around me over the canyon, and I could see the shadow of the whole spacecraft, and that was just a light that was on the nose of it.
Wow, that sounds amazing there.
Well, now picture this scene in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't give all of the details of what the ship was like in the clip we just heard. But as you sit down and talk with him, you discover that this was a large cigar-shaped craft with a very dark hull, and it had a small what Mr. Shrum refers to as a headlight at the bow end of the ship, which would be the front or the leading edge of it. Now the ship itself, and this was confirmed later when they did regressive hypnosis on Mr. Shrum, it was approximately 150 feet from stern to bow. So in other words, this was like a 14-story building that was turned on its side. This was an incredibly impressive size, compared to most UFO sightings.
Oh yeah.
So he noticed that the ship, in addition to the small light at the front, suddenly 3 large rectangular panels suddenly lit up on the side of the ship, on this otherwise dark hull. These 3 large rectangular panels suddenly lit up, flickered to life, and he saw something really strange happen in the middle panel of these 3 rectangular panels. And we're gonna continue with the testimony from the eyewitness as we listen to the appearance of a second UFO, and that's clip number 200.
All right, let's have a listen here.
And then I saw 3 panels of light, like windows or whatever, and I saw a flash come from the bottom of the center one, and just saw a dark object go down in the canyon, and then I lost track of it. And then the next thing I saw a little blinking light up on the top of originally where the first one came from.
This object that you first saw that left the center panel, what did it look like, Tom?
Well, at that time, all I saw was a flash and saw a dark object go down.
The dark object, what shape was it?
Well, I couldn't really say. It went so fast. But then I saw when it landed up on the ridge that it I could see like a half. I could only see part of the top, but it had a little light on it, and looked like the top of a flying saucer that I'd seen in pictures.
Like a dome? Or
yes. Yeah, like a dome. And then I kept my eyes on that.
Wow, that's amazing. So he's saying that this main ship, mothership, had some panels, 3 panels that opened up and released a secondary UFO.
That's exactly right. And as it turns out, as the story progresses, it became clear that most of the danger that he experienced later in the night came from the smaller ship, which landed near him. We called that second ship the scout ship or the lander. And after it came out of that middle panel, it dropped straight down into a canyon. And then it flew kind of northeast and took a position alongside a nearby ridge. And as we heard him describe there in that audio clip, the scout ship was dome-shaped and approximately 20 feet wide and about 30 feet tall. And it was out of this ship that the ETs came, as we hear the story develop.
Now, before we move forward, was he able to hear any of his hunting partners yelling or anything?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I should mention that Vincent Alvarez, who was one of his hunting companions, did actually later testify that he saw the mothership clearing the Earth's atmosphere and coming on down toward the forest. In fact, from his position maybe 2 miles away from Mr. Shrum, he was witnessing the arrival of the mothership, which he saw come down out of the sky and then hover. Unbeknownst to him at the time, it was hovering right over Mr. Shrum's position. And so the other two, once again, because it was by now dark, the other two hunters just stayed put where they were. But it is significant that we have confirmation from one of the other hunters.
And now, what happened next after this smaller scout or landing vehicle came out of the ship and approached him?
Right. Mr. Shrum was hoping that at this point, as you can imagine, all kinds of thoughts going through one's mind.
Oh, yeah.
He sees this immense object hovering right in front of it. It came right up to near his position and just hovered there. He scrambled back up the tree and was hoping that because he was in full camouflage and he was going to try to be as inconspicuous as possible, he was hoping that he would have no confrontation of any kind that could be interpreted as being negative. But something really strange happened next, and that is the arrival of some very strange beings, which Mr. Shrum refers to as humanoids. So we're going to hear clip 250 next, where he talks about the humanoids.
All right, let's listen to it.
And I heard some thrashing through the brush, and probably 5-10 minutes, these two humanoids come out of the brush, and they kind of broke some of the brush off, and was looking at it. And then they came straight underneath the tree and looked up at me, and I knew right then I was fingered.
They found you.
Yeah, they found me.
Can you describe them for us? Briefly what they
Yeah, they looked like 4 or 5 feet. Of course, I'm looking down at them, so they'd be shorter than they probably are. And they had a silvery, like a one-piece suit on, and it seemed like it had the joints, puffy joints, on the shoulders and the elbows, and the legs I didn't see that clear.
The humanoids, were you able to see their faces?
No, it was just a kind of a dark shadow. I could see the two like eyes that were looked like welding goggles to me. They're the same as welding goggles. And then the rest of the face was kind of blur. I couldn't see looking down at them.
You're able to see then. Was it large or small? They're
about 2 inches in diameter. It reminded me, just like I said, like a welding goggles.
In his description there, when he says their shoulders and things were puffy, and that they were in a suit. It's almost like, they were in some type of compressed suit like an astronaut would wear to, either prevent them from gravity or, like we do with vacuum in space. That's very, very strange.
That's a very good observation, Jamie. In fact, in the book, we have many, many sketches that were done by Mr. Shrum depicting the humanoids and the costume that they were wearing. And most of those sketches look disturbingly like U.S. astronauts. Like you say, it looks like it was some kind of a spacesuit. And even his description of the dark goggle-like eyes, which is something, it was a feature of their anatomy that he remembered and that greatly disturbed him, and that he remembered for many years afterward when he suffered the effects of basically what we would call post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now, he had terrible, terrible, frightening nightmares and anxiety. And
almost like wartime flashbacks.
Yeah, and it was sessions of therapy and hypnotherapy and hypnotic regression that finally helped him to cope with his experience. But it could have been a suit of some kind. It most likely was. Had the bellows at the elbows and also down at the knees. I couldn't imagine being there and knowing that they see you and you see them, and you have to wonder, what's going on. These are not humans. They're apparently extraterrestrials. I mean, there's nothing like this on Earth. I'm sure he was a very intelligent guy to work in the aerospace industry. In 1964, UFOs were still a very big topic in the United States. There were waves of sightings. We had been through the 50s and all of the UFO mass sightings throughout our country. They were continuing on into the 60s. So Mr. Shrum was well aware of the repercussions and the possible effects of coming into contact with these creatures. He was very concerned. He had read newspaper and magazine accounts about abductions such as Betty and Barney Hill 3 years before, and other encounters of an unsavory nature between humans and the occupants of these objects. So his anxiety level was very, very raised at the moment that the two humanoids walked right up to the base of the tree in which he was, and they looked up at him. And he realized, as he said on the audio tape, that he was fingered. In other words, they knew he was there, and he was possibly in for some problems.
A lot of the abductees claim that they can kind of talk through. Through their mind, they can kind of hear what the other side's saying. What was he getting? I'm sure he was terrified, but was this like an aggressive atmosphere? Was he,
That's interesting that you should say that, Jamie, because we asked him that question specifically, and he said that he did feel a push on his intellect, on his mind, as if they were trying to get through. He was resisting with all his mind. These two humanoids with their deep dark eyes and featureless faces were staring up at him from the base of the tree, and they seemed to be trying to penetrate him. He was not too hopeful for how things might turn out as a result of this encounter. So he determined in his mind that he would resist as much as possible. So it became a struggle, kind of his own personal war of the worlds was about to begin. And he never at any point felt that he was not in danger. And his level of anxiety was extremely high. and especially when the second type of being appeared on the scene a few moments later. If you cue up clip number 300, we'll hear about a totally different creature that appears at the base of his tree a few moments later.
All right, this should be interesting. Let's take a listen.
And then I saw two flashing red-orange light eyes just picking its way down the ridge, just between the rocks and around them and everything, and come down and was on this big boulder, this big flat rock, and then he kind of looked up at me, and he moved his hand in this through the fires, cinders, and kind of scattered them.
And the eyes of this other creature, like the robot, what did that look like to you?
And it had kind of like fire. It's kind of a orangish, reddish orange, or yellowish orange, and it kind of flickered like fire. And they're about the same diameter as about 2 inches in diameter as the humanoids.
Wow, that's amazing. So they're, a lot of people describe the Greys almost as robots, and the first being he's seen almost sounds like, it could have been a Grey, but now this type of robotic alien coming towards him. Yeah, that would just throw another wrench into paranoia. I would be freaking out to see, multiple types. But that has happened a lot in the past. Abductees report, many different types of beings aboard ships or during their encounters.
Interestingly enough, the comparison to robots or a robotic type creature was also an observation that was made by Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker in the October 1973 Pascagoula, Mississippi abduction that we've talked about. They referred to those creatures as being robot-like. Also, in the Travis Walton case from 1975, Travis talks about two distinctly different types of creatures that he saw aboard the ship after being abducted from a forest in northern Arizona. One of the types of creatures that he saw were more humanoid-like, just as Shrum observed. And the second type of creature was a smaller creature, kind of closer to what the Greys might be, except Travis has told us that they didn't look like the Greys. They looked a little bit different.
Yeah.
And also, there's some similarities between what Shrum saw and what Barney and Betty Hill described during their encounters. So, and also, many UFO cases that Ruben and I looked at, oftentimes the entities that were seen by witnesses were sometimes described as having robot-like appearance. So really, this is not an out-of-the-ordinary thing. And the other aspect of this that's very important to remember is that Mr. Shrum really did not know for sure that they were robots.
Yeah.
He used the term robot to it was just an impression that he got from them. They seemed to walk a little bit more stiffly than the creatures he called humanoids, but otherwise they were very, very similar. They were, both kinds of creatures were kind of between 4 and 5 feet tall. They were short and stocky, both of them, and they had large circular eyes that looked like goggles. He did notice, however, that the eyes of this creature he called a robot seemed to glow with kind of a reddish-orange light or a fire. And also the jaw of this robot-like creature was kind of large, square, and somewhat hinged, appeared to be hinged. And they had very large mouths.
Wow.
He thinks, he's not certain if this was a distinctly different type of creature or the same type of creature he saw at first that he called a humanoid, but in a different, bulkier suit.
Yeah.
He wasn't sure about that.
That's
it's
interesting,
just for purposes of distinction that he put the label robot.
Yeah, that's interesting, though, that he talks about a large mouth and jaw that maybe they could communicate at any time. Did he actually hear them communicating?
There was communication going on continuously between the humanoids and the mothership and the robots. It involved flashes of light and also audible sounds, which he's going to talk about in a clip we're going to hear later on.
Okay, so let's see here.
He got the distinct impression that their actions and movements were being, in other words, that they were in communication with somebody on the mothership who was controlling their actions and their behavior.
Got it, yeah. And what happened after both of these creatures approached the tree?
The beings that he described as robot-like came right up to the base of the tree. And, up to that point, he had seen the humanoids. The humanoids seemed to be more like explorers. He had noticed earlier in the encounter that they were surveying the surrounding vegetation, breaking off little pieces of little branches from some of the bushes. And so he got the impression early on about the two humanoids. He got the impression that they were not non-threatening. This other creature that appeared and moved right up to the base of the tree, he was worried about right from the beginning. And we're going to hear clip 350 as this creature makes the first aggressive move toward Mr. Shrum.
All right, let's go ahead and listen to that now.
Then he come down up on the rock. He was about 7 feet from me. And then he touched his mouth, and kind of a steam vapor come out of his mouth, and it lit up his face so I could see some detail. And then I blacked out when that steam hit me, or I guess it was kind of took the air from me. And I'd gasp for air and then black out. And I fell over my bow. That's the only thing that kept me in the tree. And then, so I figured they were out to get me then.
That kind of reminds me of the case that Frank Frascino has spent his life working on. The, what's the monsters called? I'm talking about the case that Frank Frascino works on, the something woods monster, Flatwoods monster.
The Flatwoods, yeah.
Yeah, it released some type of gas or vapor, which...
Actually, there's been a number of cases where vapor is released by the ETs. In fact, the Travis Walton case, which we were alluded to a number of times tonight, toward the end of his 5 days aboard this UFO, one of the humanoids moved over to Travis with some kind of contraption that issued forth a vapor and knocked him out. And then Travis found himself lying in the middle of a street back on Earth the next thing he knew. And Ruben and I looked at other cases where vapor was used by the ETs. So you're right, it's kind of a recurring motif. What this vapor was an odorless white steam-type vapor, which acted very much as an asphyxiant what an asphyxiant does is it sucks up all the oxygen content from the surrounding air, and although it's not toxic in the sense that it could damage your tissues, if enough of it is introduced into your surrounding area to where all the oxygen is removed from the air around you, it could possibly lead to suffocation.
Yeah.
So in the small amounts that Mr. Shrum was being exposed to, and by the way, they kept releasing this vapor throughout the night. This encounter went on for approximately 12 hours. And but each time they would release a small amount up into the tree, causing him to pass out for just a short period of time, each time.
And that's interesting that it came from the mouth, which would, I don't know, that would almost, I mean, I know, I can't think of anything on Earth that uses something like that, you know, organically. So, just very strange. But so, did he fall out of the tree? Was he hanging in the tree when he blacked out?
But what he did was he was using he had a 60-pound recurve wooden bow, and he was using it across several limbs for support.
Oh, okay.
He was in other words, he had kind of a place to lie on, and so that prevented him from falling out. And then as soon as he got wise to what they were trying to do, he belted himself using his military style belt. He belted himself around one of the large branches that was near him to give him further stability up in the tree. But what is interesting now, he's seen both of these types of creatures down at the base of the tree, the humanoids, and this robot-like creature. And it was very clear now that he was engaged in a war. I mean, they were out to get him.
And he had a weapon.
And he had, he had resisted up to this point using his weapon. But he had this 60-pound recurve bow with a 28-inch pull, which, if you fire that sucker at somebody that's real close to you, it can be as lethal as a rifle shot.
Yeah.
The problem was he only had 3 arrows.
Oh no.
And so at that point he had a choice. Was he gonna fire at the robot, which was issuing this? The robot was the only of the 2 creatures he saw that was making an aggressive move toward him. Or was he going to fire at the humanoids, which, the arrows would most likely have had more of an impact?
It almost sounds like, almost like a, when a military would move in, they would come in, secure the surroundings like the first creatures did, and then they bring in their main force, which would be this robotic-looking one to do its work, do whatever it would do.
Yeah, and that's a great observation, Jamie, because he noticed that every time that the robot would move in closer to the tree and issue the vapor, the other guys, the humanoids, would move away, retreat back into the brush. So that's exactly the type of strategy it looked like they were doing. So what he decided to do was he was going to fight back and resist and not make it easy for these guys to abduct him. So in clip 400, we're going to hear about Mr. Shrum taking the offensive finally.
All right, let's go ahead and listen to that now.
So I had a 60-pound bow, which is very high velocity, and I shot. Seeing as how the robot is the only thing that was causing me harm, I shot the chest area, and it has the velocity of a rifle at that distance, because I'm only about 7-8 feet from him. And when I hit the chest, the sparks would fly like electrical, like an arc welder kind of. And then that robot backed up and almost knocked him down. He kind of fell back against a rock, and the 2 at the bottom took off and headed for the brush and stood out there about 30 feet from me. And then I shot 2 more arrows, and it was about the same time sequence that these 2 humanoids would, every time I'd shoot, they'd go back up into the brush, just almost out of sight from me.
Wow. So this bow, which is equivalent to a rifle, just hit him and made sparks. Did not penetrate him whatsoever.
Didn't even put a dent in it. The interesting thing is, after this was all over, those arrowheads that struck those creatures, those robotic-like creatures, they actually were all twisted up, and they had scrapings on them, trace amounts of something that came off of the armor or the suit that these creatures were using. That's why Mr. Shrum was so determined to try to have those analyzed by a lab.
Wow.
And we'll talk more about that when we conclude.
All right. Well, let's do this. Let's take our last break, and when we get back, more to come here with Noe Torres, and we're talking about the Cisco Grove UFO encounter. So hold tight. We'll be right back. All right, and we're back here with our guest of the night, Noe Torres, and we're talking about the book, Aliens in the Forest, the Cisco Grove, to come here with Noe Torres, and we're talking about, that is rendering him, or making him black out, not for long, but for a bit. And the clip we just heard, he took his compound bow, which is a very strong compound bow, and he shot the one that was releasing the vapor. And as we said before the break, this didn't penetrate him at all. It just made sparks. And afterwards, what did you say? The arrow tips actually had traces of the suit on it?
Yeah, when they were gathered up later and examined, they had streaks of some strange metallic substance on it. And that's why Mr. Shrum was very determined to have them analyzed by a lab, which they were, and we can talk about later.
So, at this point, did he shoot just one arrow, or did he continue shooting more?
He shot all 3 arrows at this one robot-like creature.
Okay.
And all 3 bounced off harmlessly off its chest, causing, a flash of light and then not much else, pushing the creature back a few steps, and also causing the 2 humanoids to scurry into the nearby brush and hide for a little bit before coming back out.
That's got to be frightening, because, you're in the tree, you have a weapon, usually you could take something out, but now your weapon is useless. You have no more arrows. You fired it at him, and it didn't do anything. So
he had a few more things that he thought of.
Okay, let's talk about that.
The battle was not over.
Let's talk about that. Let's get into that.
And one of the unique things, before we go on with the narrative of the encounter, is that many times people have analyzed the scenario of human beings versus a highly advanced, technologically superior race from outer space that might show up one day at our doorstep and intend to do us harm.
Yeah.
That perhaps adopting a very low-tech approach to battling these aliens might actually end up being, in the long run, the best way to go.
Mm-hmm.
So, interestingly enough, Mr. Shrum was forced into a low-tech situation. He had only these most primitive types of weapons. He had matches, he had the bow and arrows. So there have been many UFO cases where the witnesses had more sophisticated weapons like guns and machinery, and none of it has worked. It has failed to work in the presence of these UFOs.
Yeah.
But something like a bow and arrow is the most fundamental weapon that mankind has devised.
Yeah.
So he was forced into a low-tech scenario, was my point there. And so what he did next was he had noticed earlier in the encounter that when the robot-type creature arrived, one of the first acts that it had done was it brushed off the remaining embers of fire that were still kind of lit on top of those 3 rocks at the base of the tree.
So he had a campfire going.
Yeah, he had the little 3 signal fires that he tried to signal what he thought was a helicopter with. And they were still kind of glowing. So the very first thing the robot-like creature did was went up to those and he swept them off the top of the rocks.
Okay.
So Mr. Shrum got it in his mind that perhaps these creatures were scared of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so he decided he was going to start burning stuff from up in the tree and throwing it down at them, as we're going to hear in clip number 450.
Well, I would assume Mr. Shrum was a smart man to do that, so let's take a listen here.
Then I ran out of arrows, so I only had 3 left. And I thought, well, that's when pomade haired is just, I mean, the cap I had on was just soaked with oil.
This is for your hair, Paul.
Yeah, from my hair, yeah, pomade. And I always carried all kinds of books of matches with me when I hunted. And so I lit that cap and it just blazed up, and I dropped it down the base of the tree. And just in that instant, they moved back about 12, 15 feet, and I glanced over at the ship that was over the canyon, kind of almost level with me, and it was almost out of sight. It was just like a star. It moved that fast.
Wow.
Just in that second. So then I got the idea that they're scared of fire. So I burned everything but my T-shirt and my jeans, and come to find out later on that it was 32 degrees out, and I was shaking and kind of overexposed for the weather. And at one time I had a bunch of change, and I threw it down, and they all kind of gathered around it. Well, after I shot or started burning stuff and throwing it down, and I even tied some of my shirt that I ripped up to a compass so I could try to hit some brush, because there wasn't nothing right underneath the tree. And I caught a little pile of brush on fire. I figured that would bring the cavalry. But when I ran out of stuff to burn, I headed for the top of the tree, and then it was a pretty sparse tree. I could see down to the ground, and I broke off the top and threw it down. And anytime I throw down or shake the tree, these humanoids would back up.
Now, you know what this makes me think of is almost like an interplanetary expedition where some other intelligence is sending a ship to Earth, a place they know where the gravity is, and they go there, they set up in the air, they deploy a scout ship to land their either humanoids or robots on the ground, and that's why they're so interested in the coins, maybe afraid of the fire. I don't know, it's a very interesting story so far, and we still got quite a bit to go through.
That's interesting that you should say that, Jamie, because for all we know, Mr. Shrum, as a representative of the human race, may have actually saved the planet, for all we know, that night in overcoming these ETs if they were in fact an exploratory probe to our planet,
Yeah.
and he was able to fight them off, perhaps it was a larger victory than just one man against the ETs. But what happened next is extremely even more interesting, and that is that another robot creature arrived.
Oh boy.
And he had managed to hold his own. You couldn't say that he was winning the encounter, but he was remaining out of their reach. And what had been happening before the arrival of the second robot was that every time the first robot would gas him and cause him to black out, the two humanoids would then attempt to climb the trunk of the tree. But he would awaken in time from being blacked out to be able to knock them off, kick at them with his speed and shake the tree and cause them to fall back down.
I see.
And that happened several times, but what finally happened was a second robot arrived on the scene, as we're going to hear in this next clip. Well, actually, this next clip is this next clip very interesting because he describes the climbing of the attempts to climb the tree by the humanoids. That's clip number 500. We'll hear that first, and then we'll go right to 550, the arrival of the second robot, if that's okay.
Yep. All right, let's listen to these two clips. Here we go.
Did you hear any noise between them? Any communication? Was there any?
I heard kind of a cooing or almost like an owl, but it could have been an owl, that up there, but it just kind of fit in with them.
So when you heard this owl-like sound, what did they do?
They'd go on about their business, what they were, but they would try to climb up the tree. They're trying to boost each other up the tree, and then when I would, that's why I know I wasn't out very long at a time, because when I'd throw something down or when I was being gassed, they'd step back from the tree, and then they'd be, when I'd come to, I'd have dry heaves and kind of gasp for air, and they'd just be trying to climb back up on the tree. So that gave me a time that I wasn't out very long. Well, there was that when that light was out at the top of the ridge, I could hear coyotes, and I even howled like a coyote to see if make these guys think that there's more of me coming, to get out of there. And then I heard some of them yell, and I thought, at that time I thought, well, they're attacking everything, All
right, now that was interesting because he says he's seen, what would this be, the scout ship go out?
You mean the part where it zoomed way up into the sky? Is that?
Well, he said that during this he's seen one of the lights actually go out and move away.
Yes, whenever he would attack the creatures by, when he shot the arrows, when he was dropping down fire, he noticed at one point that the mothership, which had been hovering over the canyon, right, more or less in a line with him, it suddenly zoomed way up into the sky at an incredibly fast rate. So that was an interesting observation.
And did you want to play? Did you say to play 550? I'm going to accidentally play.
We'll go to 550 now. But I'm glad you paused right there because I wanted to say that in this next clip, we're getting to the climax of what happened. The arrival of the second robot actually precipitated the end of this encounter. So we're going to hear now the beginning of the final stages of this conflict, and that's clip number 550.
All right, let's take a listen.
After I went to the top of the tree, I had a military belt, and I moved it out to the last hitch and put it around me in the tree, so in case I did get gassed, I wouldn't fall down. And then, like I said, I threw chains down and everything to try to distract them. And then finally, these two humanoids stepped back from the tree, and another robot came, and there was two just about the same place that the two humanoids were, and they stood facing each other, and flames just like lightning, and it real bright, and it just came between them. And then the gas was so thick coming up the tree that it would dissipate just about the time I got to me. But then that's when I'd start gas for air, and then when I woke up from that, it was light, but the sun hadn't come up yet, and I was just hanging by my belt, my head down, my feet down, and they were gone. Well, I knew I made it. I lived through the night.
Just to go back, did you fall asleep, or this gas? Did it overwhelm you?
Yeah, that's when it completely engulfed the whole tree and got up to me, and I don't know how long I was out, but it was just you could see just a dim glow of the sun on the clouds and stuff, not clouds, but in the sky. And then when I woke up, it was light, but the sun hadn't come up yet.
All right. Now, I'm just going to touch on there. So the two had combined their gas and sent it up the tree, and that was when he blacked out. When he woke up, at that time, it was just before sunrise. Or a lot of us can see that right before the sun's about to come up. You can kind of see, the higher up in the atmosphere is light, and then the sun rises. So he kind of passed out, and he wakes up during the daylight. Let me ask you, who is this that is interviewing him in these clips?
And I meant to say that earlier. My extreme apologies to my buddy Ruben Uriarte, because that is him that we've been hearing in the background interviewing Mr. Shrum. So that's my co-author, Ruben. I
don't think I'm going to ever, being a white male, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to pronounce his last name right. I call Ruben Uriarte. It's the best I can get.
That's close enough. It's a difficult name even for Hispanics to pronounce, so don't feel bad.
I speak a little Spanish, but the kind of words. So this had to be a relief of him seeing sunlight. And when the sun was up, were these creatures gone? Was the ship gone, the mothership, and
everything was gone? But the thing that he carried with him for a long time after this was he totally blacked out for a much longer period of time that last time when the two robots came together, and almost the entire tree was engulfed by this vapor. And then he blacked out the last time and didn't wake up until nearly sunrise. That's what caused him a lot of concern. He didn't know at that point if they had succeeded in getting to him, if they had taken him away and experimented on him and then brought him back and left him back in the tree.
Yeah.
He was very, very concerned. Had he been exposed to any kind of radiation? Could he suffer the effects of radiation sickness? Were there other physical effects that he might experience from what happened? So he was, when he came down out of that tree, he was not the same man as when he went back up, and it would affect him for years.
Yeah, it would change anybody's life. I would, that right there would totally give somebody PTSD for the rest of their life. I mean, just, it's one thing to talk about it, to research it, but to have it happen to yourself, to actually see it up front, is a totally different thing when you know these things are real and that they can get to you. That's just got to be on your mind 24/7.
I've spoken to many UFO witnesses who have, and it's so funny because they say the same thing almost in the same words, how until they had their own up-close and personal encounter with these unknown objects, until that point, they were among the multitude of people who scoff and make fun of.
Yeah, I was one of them.
People who have UFO encounters. So.
Yeah. I was one of them. In 2008, I thought all UFOs were either military or a natural phenomenon or, misidentification. But, I didn't have anything like this. All I seen was at arm's length, about 3,000 feet in the air. It's about the size of a softball. And it was an orange and yellow plasma-looking craft. It looked like a saucer, but it was like liquid. Like it had an exterior clear shell with different colored liquid inside. And, this thing had moved from one spot to another in just a blink of an eye. And then it kind of blinked out, came back on, and then blinked out. And as soon as it blinked out for good, I could see the clouds, like, right behind it. And that's when I knew, nothing on this earth can explain that. Nobody was flying that. It was not ball lightning. It was just so weird. And I came back in. It was, it was like 5 o'clock that morning. I came back in and, just started researching UFOs like crazy. So, but, seeing one and then seeing beings would be a totally different thing, so.
Mr. Shrum told us that before this incident, he had absolutely no interest in UFOs. He had read, of course, in the early 60s, there were a lot of UFO cases being reported on, so he had read about them. He didn't think much about them. He wasn't, actively calling himself a skeptic about them. He just really didn't care.
Yeah.
But when it came right up to him, and essentially when those creatures were grabbing at his feet and ankles, trying to bring him down, then it became extremely up close and personal for him.
So we have some clips left of him coming down from the tree. Can we listen to that?
Yeah, before we do that, I do want to mention a few things. His immediate sense was one of relief because the creatures were gone, and the UFO was gone, and he was still there, and touching himself all over in his body. Obviously, there were no immediately discernible physical problems. Although he intended to, and he did get a full physical examination and also make an effort to get tested for radiation exposure. But immediately, right after the incident, he noticed that the stuff he had thrown down was all around the base of the tree. There was a lot of brush that was burned from the stuff he set on fire. He saw that his arrowheads were there, and the canteen. At one point, he had thrown down his canteen and also his compass.
Was there any tracks where these humanoids had walked?
When he initially, when he gave testimony to NICAP, just a few months after the encounter, he did not mention any tracks. But when Paul Cerny arranged for a session of regressive hypnotherapy. It came out during his hypnotherapy that the whole base of the tree and the surrounding area was just littered with these strange footprints.
Wow.
He described them as kind of featureless, almost like a small child whose feet were bound up in cloth or moccasins. And they were all around the base of the tree. And that came out during his hypnosis later on, as did several other things. And one of the interesting things that of all the objects that he threw down at them, they took the coins. That was the only thing that they took. Everything else they picked up, examined, and threw back down to the ground. But the ETs took the coins. And it's like you had mentioned earlier, coins have a lot of significance to a human society, and they carry a lot of identifying information. Yeah. They have dates, they have people's faces, they have slogans or mottos, and so they would be of most interest when one culture is studying another. So it's significant to me that these ETs took Mr. Shrum's coins. And that was the only thing they took of everything he threw down.
You know, I can say I guarantee hardcore skeptics out there would probably say that, okay, he got away from his party, he slept, up in this tree, and maybe woke up with sleep paralysis in this place he was unfamiliar to, and, had a sleep paralysis encounter, but all the evidence points to the contrary, that this was absolutely a fact, with having all these prints and all the stuff down the tree, and of course the other eyewitness as well.
That's right. We have, of course, according to Mr. Shrum, he never fell asleep before he saw the UFO, and it came right up to him. So, and also he had no history. They did a complete medical check on him and released his records to NICAP. He had no history of any kind of epilepsy or any kind of problems of any kind. He was completely healthy, and medical examination after this revealed some bruising of his chest, probably when he was leaning against the tree branches and so forth. And he also, from being out in the cold with near freezing temperatures for many hours, he developed respiratory infection. But other than that, aches and pains, bruises, and a respiratory infection. Of course, the family was very concerned he might have been exposed to some radiation, as has happened in other UFO encounters. But he never developed any symptoms. And I think he actually received more harm from some of the toxic chemicals that he was using in his work with Aerojet. At that time, they were using a lot of chemicals which have since been identified as carcinogens and are no longer allowed to be used by industry. But what happened next was the involvement of the U.S. Air Force. There were two investigators from Wright-Patterson Air Base in Dayton, Ohio, that showed up on the scene, and they requested to talk to Mr. Shrum about his encounter. And when he met with them, it became clear to him and his wife, who was in the same room with him, that their purpose was not to take down his story and to try to arrive at truth. Their purpose was to talk him out and persuade him that what he saw was just some kind of freak, ordinary, earthly explanation to that.
Yep, very familiar.
If we go to clip 700, he talks about what the U.S. Air Force told him. Okay,
let's listen to that right now.
Then what happened afterwards, Don? How did you talk to anyone else about your...
Well, my family, I told them. And then the only outside person at that time was a professor at at one of the colleges, and my mother-in-law had gone. It was her professor when she was younger, so we told him the story, and he's the one that contacted the Air Force.
So what happened there, Don, with the Air Force?
Well, they made an appointment to post-bid representatives of the Air Force, and they tried to disillusion me. They said, well, you know, the Japanese might have had somebody up there, you know, they were still, you know, and they said it was Boy Scouts dressed up, you know, in costume just to scare somebody. And I said, yeah, I'm sure they're going to spend all night and keep a guy in a tree, you know. And, then they said the Army probably bivouacked up there and it was in a training camp. So my father-in-law was in the Air Force. So he called and found out there was no military in that area for any reason, because it was a pretty desolate area. And they tried to disillusion me every way they could. And they took the Arrowhead, the main one, and they said, well, we'll get back to you and you can have this back as soon as we get through with it, which I never did. But when I went back up there during rifle season, I found the other arrow, the third one.
You found two then, and then you found the other one.
And when we went back, the area had been raked. And there's an area probably 50 feet around that tree, and there was cigarette packages and cigar butts, and so I know the Air Force checked it out pretty good.
That explains.
And they had an easy way to find it, because there's an orange circle around that tree where it caught little fires.
All right.
And it was showing orange, so they had no problem finding it. And I marked on the map that they had where it was, the location.
You know, that's interesting. I had a guest on my show who was part of the Air Force's NBC crew, which is a nuclear biological cleanup crew. And they were sent out to clean up, you know, certain crashes or some things like this. I'm going to have to ask him what years he was a part of that, because he was based very close to Wright Pat, and I know he also lived in California, so I might ask him about this case, see if he knows anything. But you know what's weird, and what I would really like to know is why do these military personnel always come to people who have had close encounters or abductions and just tell them not to say something? It's almost like they're either working with them or they're trying to hide it from the public at large. I don't know. It's almost like they're either working with them or they're trying to hide it from the public at large. I don't know.
Well, this is very odd. As we heard Mr. Shrum just say, on the surface, during the interview with the Air Force, they kept telling him that what he experienced had a earthly explanation, that it was Boy Scouts in costumes, that perhaps the military, the Army, was having maneuvers out in the forest, and perhaps there were some stray Japanese soldiers from World War II era still living out there in the forest and terrorizing poor hunters in the middle of the night. You know, so they came up with all these weird attempts at explaining it, where he pinpointed the exact location of the encounter. They took his biggest piece of evidence, which was the one arrow of the three that seemed to have the largest concentration of a metallic substance at its tip, and the tip had been totally bent over, by the way. And so they took his strongest piece of evidence, said they would give it back to him, and which they never did, of course. And then, come to find out, when he went back to the scene 2 or 3 weeks later, the entire area had been raked clean. All the footprints, all the evidence had been collected from the scene, and there was absolutely no longer any trace whatsoever of his UFO encounter.
Yeah.
And then, probably the worst thing to Don Shrum, and the thing that to this day really, really disturbs him and makes him extremely angry, is that when the Blue Book, the two Blue Book investigators from Wright-Patterson that interviewed him, when they filed their report, which many years later they got through a Freedom of Information request, they got the report, and it says on there that the explanation that was arrived at by Project Blue Book to explain Mr. Shrum's encounter was psychological problem.
Wow.
There was absolutely no history whatsoever of any psychological problems. He was in perfect health, and that was just something that made him very, very angry. A previously very patriotic individual who had a great deal of respect for military institutions and so forth, but he felt really, really hurt.
Yeah,
he was really hurt.
I bet. So, a couple of questions left here. Now, we'll go back just a little bit. Now, when he got down from the tree, he ended up finding his other hunting partners, and they left the woods. Did he tell them right away?
He was so exhausted. He was able to get down from the tree, and he moved in the direction of the base camp they had established on Friday morning. And he didn't make it all the way back before he basically collapsed. But shortly after he fell down and was basically asleep, then one of his companions, one of the other hunters, Mr. Alvarez, Vincent Alvarez, happened upon him, saw a figure lying in the grass, and went over and saw that it was him. And he roused him, got him back on his feet, and walked him back to camp, where he proceeded to fall asleep for 6 hours solid.
Wow.
He was so exhausted, and he was, he was completely disheveled. He was dressed only in a T-shirt and his pants. He had set everything else on fire and thrown it down. So his companions later testified that they saw him in this horrible condition, and he had obviously been through something very traumatic. And then when he finally woke up after his 6-hour sleep and started telling them this incredible tale, Vincent Alvarez then made the immediate connection with a strange object that he saw coming down out of the Earth's atmosphere earlier in the evening. So he told Mr. Shrum, he said, I saw that object coming down. And he later, Mr. Shrum, he later gave Mr. Shrum a written affidavit, which we have a copy of, and was in the NICAP and MUFON files, where he states that he saw that object.
Right.
And so then they made it back to their homes, and then Mrs. Shrum enters the picture, and she tells a remarkable tale to this day of how she had never seen her husband in such a distressed condition ever before or ever since, as when she saw him enter the door, having come back from this hunting expedition. And I wonder if we have time, Jamie, to listen to clip 750, the after effects of the incident?
Definitely. This is the after effects of what happened to him caused. Let's take a listen here.
I'd like to go there. I just wanted to ask you, how has this affected you? Did you have any nightmares or any...
Well, for a year, I had, screaming nightmares. I'd wake up yelling, those eyes, and I'd be just a cold sweat, just be drenched with sweat. And I even thought about, when I was up in the top of that tree, I thought about just jumping off and jumping down the canyon and just killing myself. But the only thing that kept me going is I had the little girl, my wife, and that kept me fighting.
Wow, that's tough to listen to.
The one thing that Ruben has told me in the many interviews that he's done with Mr. Shrum is how it physically affects him, even to this day, so many years later. It physically affects him. You can see him start to shake, and I watched the videotape of the interviews Ruben did. You can see Mr. Shrum start to shake, and his eyes become watery, and as he recalls this horrific experience.
Yeah, those eyes.
You know, I've had a number of people tell me that perhaps he misjudged them, the ETs, that perhaps he misjudged their motives. But Mr. Shrum, from the word go, felt that there was nothing good that would come out of having these creatures get a hold of him.
Yeah.
And he maintains that to this very day. These were not friendly ET call home creatures. They were out. He feels convinced that they were intending to add him to their specimen collection.
Exactly, just like we do on other planets. We would, if we found a life form on another planet, say we found a rabbit on Mars, you don't think we would try to capture that rabbit no matter what and bring it back home?
The arrival of the second robot, I think, speaks volumes to the fact that they were really trying to get to him.
Yeah.